I definitely appreciate you all who are in attendance today. Obviously, we know that these are some pressing times. I know that there's a lot of unanswered questions that you have throughout the process for any of the loans, the EIDL loan or the paycheck protection loan. We're in our hopes today is that Ms. Joanne is going to be able to address some of those concerns. Um, and I apologize for all listeners. If you're unaware who I am, I'm Kenyatta Sparks. I'm with SJB Group, DB Supportive Services. We have a contract with the Department of Transportation, who is responsible for sponsoring this today's webinar. We host I apologize, we provide a number of different resources to all certified DBE firms. However, we are available to assist any firms who may be interested in getting more information concerning the program itself. And because of that, we've had the opportunity to develop some very strong relationships with other resource agencies that provide similar assistance as well as additional. That being said, I'm going to just go over a few housekeeping things, and then I'm going to introduce one of those partners that we have that I'm excited about. They're always making the opportunity to do webinars such as this. So just a few things for housekeeping. To help it flow a little bit better, if you can put all your questions in the question and answer section and not in the chat, it'll help us flow better when we ask them, where I don't have to bounce back and forth. What we will do, of course, obviously with time afforded, we'll do a break in the middle to address a few questions, and then we'll also do some more at the end. And anything that we cannot address, I'll get with Ms. Joe, and we'll do our best to get those unanswered questions responded in written form. The presentation, as well as the PowerPoint slides and the recording, will be available once we complete any editing. I will have that provided via email to all attendees. If you don't receive it in a timely fashion, please feel free just to reach out to me, and I'll give you an updated status, or I'll make sure to confirm that we have the correct email. And it also will be available on our website, which is SJB Louisiana, and Louisiana is spelled out. So that'd be SJB Louisiana DBE.com. And you can visit that for all certified DBE firms. We're required to assist all firms in Region A, which is consists of Baton Rouge, Lake Charles, Lafayette, Alexandria, Shreveport, and Monroe. But obviously, any firms outside of that region are more than welcome to still send information in, and I'll make sure to get that with the consultant who is tasked to consult Region B, which is Urban League of Louisiana, and I'll make sure to get your information to them, and they will reach out to you to continue any assistance. So without further ado, I want to take this moment to introduce our presenter for the day, Ms. Joanne Lawrence, who is the Deputy Director for the Louisiana District SBA office. She's my go-to person whenever I have any questions concerning these programs, and obviously even other information that's through SBA. But because of what the most important interest is of this webinar, when it comes to the EIDL and the PPP loan, she's my go-to person. So I'm gonna pass it on to Ms. Joe. I'm gonna allow her to take it over from here. And once again, any questions, please put it in the question and answer section. Ms. Joe?
Hey, Kenyatta, thank you so much. And I appreciate this opportunity to be able to just provide some information on SBA's funding options. And we thank you and SJB Group for being a valuable partner with us and helping to get the information out. Can you go to slide number 2, please? the one that
Okay.
says funding options,
Yes,
because
ma'am.
I can't see. But
That's fine.
anyway, so
I'm gonna get it
today
up for
we're
you,
going,
bro.
I can see you.
Can you
Okay,
see it? Can you see it now?
I see you. I don't see the slides.
Okay, hold
Um,
on 1 second.
okay.
Can you see it
Okay.
now?
Yeah, so if we can go to the next slide. Okay, so we're going to talk about the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. You'll hear us refer to that as EIDL. The Express Bridge loans, the debt relief that's available to you if you're an existing SBA borrower, and the Paycheck Protection Program. Next slide, please. When we get to PPP, I'm going to provide some information that may be helpful to you in preparing your PPP forgiveness application. So with the SBA Economic Injury, go back one, with the SBA Economic Injury Disaster Loan, of course, this is a working capital loan. And what it's designed to do is to give you up to 6 months of working capital to provide provide for your being able to meet your operating expenses for up to 6 months. Next slide, please. So, one of the big questions that we get a lot is, how does my credit play a factor in my being able to get an EIDL? Let me just say that we don't just look at the credit score, we're looking at credit history. I will add that SBA has lowered the credit score consideration that we're giving. So it's below what you might normally think it is. But even in doing that, we still will review the credit history. Go to the next slide, Kenyatta. We still will review the credit history. And in reviewing the credit history, we're basically going to see how you take care of your business, how you pay your bills. That's going to give us an idea of, if you're taking care of paying your expenses now, then there's a likelihood that you'll be paying your SBA loan. This is a loan. And of course, repayment ability is going to be one of the key factors that we will consider. Next slide, please. So in looking at this, the maximum on the loan is $2 million. However, SBA received more than 10 million applications. So of course, we're doing our best to give the applicants as much as we can. Now, unofficially, there's been a cap of $150,000. However, there have been some firms who have been approved for more than $150,000 if their application supported that. This is a fixed interest rate loan. So if you are a small business, then for 30 years, your interest rate is going to be 3.75%. And for nonprofit entities, for 30 years, the interest rate will be 2.75%. So this loan is available to small businesses and nonprofit organizations as well. And you can use this loan to pay the current portion of long-term debts, basically to pay your fixed debts, to meet payroll, accounts payable, and other bills like utility bills that may have to be paid, and you would be able to pay them had this disaster not occurred. This loan is not intended to replace lost sales or profits, nor can you use this loan for entering into new debt or for expansion. Next slide, please. Regarding the collateral requirements, we are not requiring a personal guarantee on loans up to $200,000. However, if the loan exceeds $25,000, then there will be a UCC filing on furniture and fixtures on loans up to $500,000. And then for those $500,000 and above, we will require real estate on those loans. Next slide, please. So just about all businesses, types of businesses would be eligible as long as they are not on SBA's ineligible list of businesses that are eligible for SBA loans. So that's going to include hotels, recreational facilities, charter boats, manufacturers, sports vendors, owners of rental property, like if you've suffered lost rents, restaurants, retailers, souvenir shops, travel agencies. Farmers are now eligible, and wholesalers. Next slide, please. And you must have a physical presence, okay? So just having an internet office is not going to be acceptable. This is a direct loan from SBA. The funds come directly from the Treasury. So you will not be dealing with a bank or other lender on an idle. There is no fee that you have to pay to apply for this loan. The only fee that you'll have to pay would be the $100 to cover the UCC filing. If you are approved for the loan, you're not obligated to take the loan. You can also always deny it. If the amount for which you are approved is more than you've determined that you need, then prior to accepting that amount, then you want to use the opportunity when the offer is made to you to reduce that loan amount. If for some reason the loan is dispersed and you determine after the loan is dispersed that it's more than what you need, then you will have to wait until your loan goes into servicing before your documents can be adjusted, your loan documents. That's why it's critical that when you're given the opportunity to accept the amount, if you see that that's more than what you need, then adjust it at that time before you accept the amount. You will have 60 days to accept the amount that's offered. If you do not accept the amount that's offered within that 60-day time frame, the loan will be withdrawn. If you have an existing disaster loan, you would still be eligible to apply for an EIDL related to this pandemic. So the fact that you have an existing loan will not keep you from applying for an EIDL for this pandemic. However, you cannot consolidate the loans, nor can you use this EIDL to pay off other SBA loans. Next slide, please. The company has to be independently owned and operated. So we're looking at whether or not you have a substantial business risk. Basically, have you invested anything in this business in terms of facilities and equipment for which you are incurring ongoing expenses? The company has to be free from outside control by another individual or entity, and merely filing a Schedule C to your tax return would not necessarily qualify you as an independently owned and operated entity. Next slide, please. So this is just a listing of some of the ineligible EIDL applicants: charitable organizations, if you are a consumer or marketing co-op, if you're engaged in gambling, and more than a third of your annual gross revenues comes from legal gambling activities, you would not be eligible. Casinos and racetracks are not eligible. If you're engaged in any type of illegal activity, you're not eligible. Next slide, please. If you are a lending or investment company, or if you're engaged in speculative activities, you're not eligible for an EIDL. Pawn shops are not eligible if 50% or more of their previous year's income was derived from interest. Real estate developers are ineligible. Pyramid concerns, packagers who derive 30% or more of their income from putting together SBA loans, and those who are incarcerated on parole or probation are ineligible. Next slide, please. Government-owned entities, political and lobbying businesses or concerns, those engaged in providing sexual content or performances of a sexual nature are not eligible. If you're involved in an ownership change and there was not a contract in place prior to the time of the disaster being declared, which for purposes of the EIDL is January 31st, 2020, you would not be eligible. And if the company started after January 31st, 2020, you would not be eligible for an EIDL. Next slide, please. You cannot use the funds to refinance any long-term debt, nor can you use it to pay down other debt other than meeting those regular installment payments on those loans. Payment of any part of a direct federal debt that includes SBA loans, except that if you're in a repayment plan with IRS and there are monthly payments that you have to make, then you would be able to make those monthly payments from the EIDL. To be eligible for the EIDL, you must be current on all federal debt, and that includes SBA loans. Next slide, please. To apply for the EIDL, you will go to SBA's disaster website, or you can put in COVID-19 relief.sba.gov, and that will bring you to the application page. You will note that on SBA's disaster website, it offers the opportunity for you to submit a paper application, and that would be submitted to our processing and disbursement center in Fort Worth. If you have questions about the application forms, of course, we're available at the district office to assist you. However, you can also email disaster customer service at sba.gov, or you can call 800-659-2955. Next slide, please. Our resource partners are available to assist you. So for the Louisiana District Office, of course, we have our small business development centers that are located throughout the state. We have SCORE, which are counselors to America's small businesses and also serve as mentors. And our Women's Business Resource Center is available to assist you. Next slide, please. If you have not submitted your EIDL application, we're encouraging you to submit your application as quickly as possible. Yes, we have funds now. We have no idea when or if those funds are going to be exhausted. So we're encouraging everyone to submit their application as quickly as possible. If for some reason you are denied, then you have 6 months to request reconsideration. If you're denied because of issues on your credit report, then what we encourage you to do is to pull your credit report, because we're going to tell you which credit reporting agency we used to process your application. So you want to pull that credit report and take a look at it and make sure that those issues that are on there that may be negative are actually your issues. But if there's issues on there where you can get with that creditor to work out a repayment plan, then you want to take advantage of that, so that when you do request reconsideration, you're able to demonstrate to SBA that you're actually taking care of that debt. Next slide, please. So this next slide shows you the first page of the application, and it's an electronic application. So you're actually responding to a questionnaire and providing the information that's requested of you. So I included this so we can just take a look at what that information is. Next slide, please. The first portion of the application form asks you to verify your eligibility. If you're a small business that doesn't have more than 500 employees, or if you're an agricultural enterprise, which is something that's new, because previously we were not able to make loans to agricultural enterprises. But as a result of the widespread effect of COVID-19, we've been given the authority to accept applications from agricultural enterprises. If you, regardless of your structure, if you're a sole proprietor, with or without employees, or an independent contractor, so you're going to actually check which of these apply to your company, and you're only going to check one to verify your eligibility. Next slide, please. For the next section, you have to be able to check all of the blocks in this section, that you're not engaged in any illegal activity. Okay, this goes back to ineligible businesses, that an owner or principal is not more than 60 days delinquent on child support obligations. That's an owner of the applicant that has at least a 50% interest in the company. This was not one of the ineligible factors that were specifically pointed out in the list of ineligible items, but you note that this is something that's a part of the application, that you're not engaged in providing sexual nature performances or items of a sexual nature in terms of content, rather, that you're not engaged in legal gambling activities where more than a third of your gross annual revenue comes from legal gambling activities. You're not a lobbyist, and you're not a government agency. And once you check all of those blocks, you're able to press the continue button. Next slide, please. On this section, this is where you're going to start to give us the information on the company. We encourage you to use your tax ID number. Go to the next slide, Kenyatta. Your employee identification number. Please, Kenyatta.
Ma'am?
Hear me? Okay, go to the next slide. Or at least I'm not seeing it. The one that says business information. Okay, yeah, that's right. Okay, thank you. So we want you to pay particular attention to the red bars and to the red asterisks. You know that that is mandatory information. Okay, I had an applicant. If you look below those first set of red bars, it says, is the applicant a nonprofit organization? Yes or no? Is the applicant a franchise? Okay, if you are a franchise, of course, check yes, and then you'll be asked to put in the franchise name. However, that franchise has to be on SBA's franchise directory. If not, then we'll have to get approval of that franchise. It'll have to be reviewed. However, if you're not a franchise, please do not check that you are. We had an applicant who checked that they were a franchise, and when they were denied because they were not on the franchise directory, they came to us and asked us, well, why did we determine them to be a franchise? That's because they checked that they were. So just be careful when you're responding to these questions. The next section, the gross revenues for the past 12 months and the cost of goods sold. What you put there is going to determine how much of the loan will be approved for you. You'll notice that in this application, there is nowhere for you to put an amount of the loan that you're requesting. We're going to determine that based upon your gross revenues that you indicate here and your cost of goods sold. Next slide, please. So on this section, you're continuing the information on your company, where you're going to put in your physical address, but you're also going to provide us a description of any other compensation that you received, points of contact information, phone number, and email address, just in case we have to get in touch with you. So please give us accurate information. We ask you to provide to us the date that your business was established and the current ownership date, how long you've actually owned the business activity in which you are engaged, and your number of employees as of January 31st, 2020. Next slide, please. This section allows you to put in the ownership information, and if there are multiple owners, then you would click the button that says add additional owners and then click next. Next slide, please. This page, we're asking additional eligibility information from you, and also if you had someone who assisted you in completing this application, that you provide us that individual's name and also any fee that they were charged. Now, as you're looking at this application, you'll notice that there is proprietary information that you're being required to submit in this application, like your tax ID number or your social security number if you don't have a tax ID number. This is information that you don't want just out there with anyone having that information. You want to hold that close to your chest. So be careful about allowing somebody to complete this application for you, because you'll be divulging some of your personal identifiable information. Next slide, please. I'm not sure how this happens, but there have been errors made where individuals have put in the incorrect banking information, either incorrect account number or incorrect routing number. Please pay attention to what information you're putting here, because we've had cases where the account number was wrong, and when we sent the money to the bank, it was sent back to SBA because of an incorrect account number. You may get a call from one of the loan processors asking you to provide a copy of a canceled check, and that's generally because the funds were returned to SBA, and now we're trying to verify the account information. We know that some of the lenders have been going back to some of the applicants and asking them to set up a business bank account. That's not something that SBA is requesting. So if your bank is requesting that, then you'll need to work that out with your bank. Next slide, please. Once you get into the processing queue and we need to verify information, you will receive an email from Disaster Customer Service at SBA.gov asking you to create an account. Now, we've become aware that sometimes the link in that email is not working properly. If that happens to you, please send an email to Disaster Customer Service at SBA.gov or call the 1-800 number and let them know that your link is not working. Next slide, please. And once you complete that account, recreate your account portal, that's where you'll get an opportunity once your loan is approved to accept or deny the loan or to request a decrease in the loan amount that's being offered to you. So the next thing that's available to you is SBA debt relief on existing SBA loans. Next slide, please. So if you have a current SBA loan and with the bank, meaning that it's a 7A loan or 504, a micro loan or international trade loan, and that loan was in good standing as of March 27th, then SBA is paying the principal, interest, and fees on those loans for a period of 6 months. So that's the debt relief that we're offering to our existing borrowers who have guaranteed loans. If you apply for a new SBA loan and that loan is dispersed prior to September 27, 2020, then we're granting debt relief to those new borrowers as well. So that's what we're offering to our guaranteed borrowers, where you're working with a lender. But keep in mind, your loan must be in good standing, meaning that you're current on all payments. Next slide, please. If you have an existing disaster loan and it was in good standing, meaning that it was in regular servicing as of March 1st, 2020, then we're providing automatic deferments through December 31st, 2020. Interest will continue to accrue on those loans, and you have the option of accepting that deferment or continuing to make the payments. If you have your existing disaster loans set up on automatic debits or recurring payments, in order to take advantage of this deferment, you would need to halt those payments. And once that deferment period is over, you would need to reestablish those automatic deferments. If you are approved for a new EIDL for the pandemic, then your first payment will not be due for a year after the disbursement date. Next slide, please. Our Express Bridge loans are in place to assist you to bridge the gap between your applying for your EIDL and that EIDL being dispersed. Next slide, please. So we're able to do this because our Express Bridge Loan pilot program was expanded, and that became effective on March 25th, 2020. And you're being negatively impacted by the pandemic. You must have a business relationship with one of the SBA approved express lenders. The maximum amount on the Express Bridge loan is $25,000, and it is to help you overcome the temporary loss of revenue. And as I mentioned, it's intended to bridge the gap between your applying for your EIDL and that EIDL being approved and dispersed. There is no collateral required on the Express Bridge loans, and you would be able to, this pilot program is available through March 13th, 2021. Next slide, please. So now on to the Paycheck Protection Program. It is important to note that even though SBA has been given the responsibility of administering this program, this is not an SBA loan program. It's actually a Treasury program. So that's why you will note that there are a lot of things that occur within this Paycheck Protection Program that are not allowed under SBA's normal 7A loan program. Next slide, please. So keep in mind the express intent of this program, and that is to keep people on payroll and to continue to pay them during this pandemic for either a period of 8 weeks or a period of 24 weeks. And you have to be able to make the certification that there is a need because of the pandemic. So it's a good faith certification that you're making. So you have to make it at the time that you apply for the Paycheck Protection Program loan and at the time that you request forgiveness of the loan. Next slide, please. So it is intended for you as a small business owner to keep your workforce employed, to provide that direct incentive to you to keep them on payroll. Effective June 5th, you have 24 weeks to use the funds. Previously it was 8 weeks, but now you have 24 weeks to use the funds, and they can be used for payroll, mortgage interest payments, rent, or utilities. And the period to accept and approve applications has been extended to August 8, 2020. So that means that all of the PPP applications have to be approved by August 8, 2020. Next slide, please. So who can apply? Small businesses, which includes manufacturers, regular dealers, and wholesalers. If they have less than 500 employees. If you're in the construction, service, or retail industry, then you must meet the size standard based upon your gross average annual receipts for the past 5 years. So you don't get to choose both. You either fall under an employee-based size standard or a revenue-based size standard. Next slide, please. So ineligible businesses, those that are engaged in illegal activities, be it illegal under the federal, state, or local law. If you're a household employer, someone that employs housekeepers or nannies, you would be ineligible. If you're incarcerated, on probation, or on parole, or presently subject to an indictment or criminal information or arraignment, you're ineligible. If you've been convicted of a felony within the last 5 years, you're ineligible. There is an exception that went into effect on June 5th, and that is if it was for a non-financial felony, the look back is just 1 year. And this exception does not include fraud, bribery, embezzlement, or false statements on a loan application or an application for federal financial assistance. If you are delinquent or have defaulted on SBA or any other federally guaranteed loan, and that occurred within the last 7 years, and it caused a loss to the government, you would be ineligible. Next slide, please. If you're involved in bankruptcy proceedings, you're ineligible. Hedge funds and private equity firms are ineligible. If you have resources that you could have used to meet your expenses, that goes back to your not being able to certify in a good faith manner that the current economic uncertainty makes the loan request necessary to support your ongoing operations. And hospitals who receive 50% or more of funding from state or local government sources, except Medicaid, would be ineligible. Next slide, please. You must have been in operation on February 15th, 2020, and either had employees to whom you paid salaries and payroll taxes or paid independent contractors. If you operate as a sole proprietor or as an independent contractor or other eligible self-employed individual, you must have been in operation as of February 15th, 2020, and you must qualify as a small business. Now, independent contractors can apply on their own, so you cannot use them in your employee calculation. Next slide, please. So for now, we're aware that not all of the lenders that were originally participating in the PPP continue to participate. So if your lender is not participating, then we're encouraging you to use the lender find link that's on the PPP page, or you can use SBA's lender match link. And the lender match link has been opened up just for our smaller lenders and our CDFIs because they are continuing to participate in the PPP. So the small lenders, community banks, and CDFIs are the ones where you would have access in lender match. And in lender match, you're going to input your information, and if someone is interested in making that PPP to you, they will reach out to you. Next slide, please. So regarding forgiveness, keep in mind the intent of the PPP and the uses of proceeds. So you want to make sure that you use the PPP funds for the payroll costs, for making interest payments on mortgages associated with the business, rents, and utilities. And at least 60% of the forgiven amount must have gone to payroll. And you must maintain or quickly rehire your employees and maintain their salary levels. There can be no reduction in the full-time head count or no decrease in their salary or wages. And you would be eligible for up to 100% of the principal amount of the loan. For those loans that are made on or after June 5th, the maturity is 5 years, which means that any amount that's not forgiven must be repaid within 5 years. For those loans that were made prior to June 5th, your maturity is 2 years. And if you want that extended, then you and the bank or the lender would have to agree to extend it beyond the 2-year period. That's not SBA's call. That's between you and the lender. And the interest rate is 1%. Next slide, please. On these loans, there is no collateral required. There are no personal guarantees required. Neither SBA nor the lender will charge you any fees. You must use all of the funds within 24 weeks. Keep in mind that you cannot use the independent contractors for purposes of your loan forgiveness or in your calculation. If for some reason you've submitted your application and you included independent contractors in your payroll count or your employee count, then you need to work with your lender now to get that corrected. If there is a reduction in the full-time head count, or if the salaries decrease beyond 25%, then the amount of the loan that's going to be forgiven will be reduced. And if 60% of the forgiven cost does not go to payroll, then the amount of your forgiveness is going to be reduced. Next slide, please. There is a deferral period in terms of when you have to start making payments on these loans for whatever amount that is not forgiven. So you must submit your forgiveness application within 10 months of your loan forgiveness covered period. So your covered period is either 8 weeks from disbursement or 24 weeks from disbursement. So keep in mind that you have to submit your loan forgiveness application within 10 months of your loan forgiveness period. If your loan was made prior to June 5th, then you may elect to have your loan forgiveness period be the 8-week period. That's up to you. The lender will notify you if your loan is not eligible for forgiveness of any amount or any portion of the loan that's not eligible, or if no forgiveness is allowed at all. And then you would have to start making payments immediately upon that notification. If you do not submit your forgiveness application within 10 months after your loan forgiveness period, then you must begin to make the payments. And your forgiveness application must be submitted by October 10th, 2021, if your covered period allows you to go that long. Next slide, please. The payroll costs includes compensation to employees who live in the United States. Their principal residence is the United States, and it includes salary, wages, commissions, or similar compensation, cash tips, or the equivalent. As it relates to cash tips, then you as the applicant would be required to submit the documentation to support whatever tips were made. It also includes vacation, parental, family, medical, or sick leave, allowance for separation or dismissal, the payment of the benefits that includes the health insurance premiums, state and local taxes that are assessed on compensation of employees, and for independent contractors or sole proprietors, your wage or commissions, income or net earnings, or similar compensation as a self-employed individual would be considered payroll costs. Next slide, please. Exclusions from payroll costs include compensation to those individuals whose principal place of residence is outside the U.S., any compensation above $100,000 to any one employee. The federal unemployment taxes, the FICA, are excluded. And if you're eligible for a credit under the CARES Act for qualified sick and family leave, then those portions would be excluded from payroll costs. Next slide, please. So just a reminder of how the Act specifies payroll costs are calculated. And they're calculated on a gross basis without regard to the federal taxes imposed or withheld, such as the FICA. Okay. The employer side of federal payroll taxes imposed on wages are excluded from payroll costs under the CARES Act. For self-employed individuals, sole proprietors, and independent contractors, keep in mind that your participation in the PPP may affect your eligibility for unemployment compensation. And if you are a self-employed individual, sole proprietor, independent contractor, if line 31 of your Schedule C is 0 or less, you would not be eligible for a PPP. Next slide, please. So just some information that the lenders have to consider in determining your eligibility. So they give some consideration to whether or not you are a seasonal borrower and that you were in operation on February 15, 2020, or for an 8-week period between February 15, 2019 and June 30th, 2019. You can calculate your payroll costs using the previous 12 months period or for calendar year 2019. Next slide, please. It is your responsibility to provide an accurate calculation of your payroll costs. However, if the lender identifies any errors in your calculation, they will work with you to correct those. And the exclusion of compensation in excess of $100,000 annually applies only to cash compensation. It would not include the non-cash benefits. Next slide, please. For sole proprietors, self-employed individuals, and independent contractors, your owner compensation replacement will be calculated based upon your 2019 net profit, which means that line 31 on your Schedule C has to show a net profit. You cannot use 100% of the loan proceeds solely for your individual salary, because the loan amount, in addition to it being based upon your net profit, includes an amount to allow you to cover your operating expenses like the rent and mortgage interest payments. So keep in mind that you cannot use 100% of the PPP to pay your salary. Next slide, please. Indebtedness for which interest payments are made must have been in place as of February 15, 2020. So just like the EIDL, it is not the purpose of the PPP for you to engage in new debt and then use the PPP to pay that debt. So whatever it is, the interest must have been in those indebtedness must have been in place as of February 15, 2020. Now, if you were fortunate enough to get an EIDL between January 31st and April 3rd, then your maturity is going to be reset to 2 years if the loan was made prior to June 5th, and to 5 years if the loan was made after June 5th. You cannot use the PPP funds and the EIDL funds for the same purpose during the covered period. And your loan proceeds from the PPP that you use for a deductible expense like payroll, office rent, or utilities are not eligible to be deducted on your 2020 tax return if your PPP loan is forgiven. Next slide, please. If your EIDL loan was not used for payroll costs, it's not going to affect your eligibility for a PPP loan. If you received the EIDL advance up to $10,000, that amount is going to be deducted from your loan forgiveness amount on the PPP loan. And for those independent contractors, regardless of whether or not you filed your 2019 tax returns with IRS, you would be required to submit your 2019 Schedule C with your PPP application. You must be able to provide a 2020 invoice, bank statement, or book of record to establish that you were in operation on or before February 15, 2020. Next slide, please. SBA is going to review all loans in excess of $2 million, and also we'll be looking at other loans on a random basis as we deem necessary. Keep in mind that SBA will be reviewing all of the forgiveness applications that are submitted to us, and we'll be getting back with the lenders to let them know whether or not we're going to forgive that loan. Next slide, please. Just a reminder of the key certifications and some key issues that were made. And one of them is that you're certifying that the PPP loan was actually needed, and that that certification that you made was in good faith, taking into account your current business activity and your ability to access other sources of liquidity. If requested, you have to be prepared to demonstrate to SBA the basis for your certification. You're also certifying that the funds will be used to retain workers and maintain their payroll, make mortgage interest payments, lease payments, and utility payments, that you understand that if the funds are knowingly used for unauthorized purposes, the government may hold you legally liable, such as for charges of fraud, and you're certifying that not more than 40% of the loan proceeds will be used for non-payroll costs. Next slide, please. There is a safe harbor. So we're asking and encouraging all of the borrowers to review their determinations of whether the loan was necessary to support ongoing operations. This is a part of preparing for forgiveness if you have not, if you have already received your PPP funds. If you determine that the loan may not have been necessary, then we're allowing you to return the funds to the lender. The original safe harbor date was May 18th, 2020. However, if you see now that you may have made an error, you have an opportunity to return those funds to the lender, and we'll consider you to have made a good faith certification. If you know that you have a potential eligibility issue, then we're encouraging you to seek counsel about addressing whatever that issue may be. Next slide, please. Prior to loan forgiveness, as I mentioned, we're going to conduct a full review on every loan above $2 million. However, keep in mind that SBA has to review all applications that are submitted for forgiveness. Next slide, please. Another safe harbor that's available to you, say for instance, you offer to rehire someone at the same salary or wage and at the same number of hours, and that employee declines the offer, then we're not going to penalize you if you're able to demonstrate to us that the offer was made in writing, that you're able to document that the offer was made. So in making it in writing, you know, you want to either do it through email with a delivery and read receipt, or through certified mail, or through text messaging. But it is your responsibility to demonstrate to us that you did make this offer and you made it in good faith. And if the employee declines, then that you're able to demonstrate to us that you notified the state unemployment office, and that you must do this prior to December 31st, 2020. If you reduced an employee's wage or salary, you have until December 31st, 2020 to cover that employee's back pay. You can provide documentation regarding refusals to accept restoration of a reduction in in hours, or firings for cause if you had to get rid of someone for whatever reason it was. They weren't performing the way they were supposed to perform, or they violated some of your policies or procedures. If there were any voluntary resignations, or you have a written request from an employee for a reduction in their work schedules. Or, there may be other things that you were not able, that they're not able, for other reasons rather, for which the employee may not have been able to return to work. If you're able to support that, then we're not going to penalize you. However, all of that must have taken place on or before December 31st, 2020. Next slide, please. So in preparing for forgiveness, you want to make sure that you're able to demonstrate how you use the funds. So does that mean that you need to set up a separate bank account or hold the proceeds in a different account? It's up to you. You just want to make sure that you're able to show exactly how you used those funds. If you set up a separate bank account, then make sure that you're paying the expenses that you want forgiven from that account, and that you're able to fully document what you want forgiven. Keep detailed payroll records, which would include the number of employees and the number of hours that were worked. Cancel checks, invoices, and receipts to support the amount you want forgiven. Be prepared to submit the IRS Form 941 and the written documentation to support your good faith efforts to rehire employees. Next slide, please. Make sure that you're correctly categorizing and tracking your expenditures. Make sure that you're operating within the express intent of the PPP and the CARES Act. Go back and look at your original application, because there will be information from your original application that you'll need to include in your forgiveness application. Providing the documentation, verifying the number of full-time equivalent employees on payroll, the dollar amounts of payroll costs, covered interest payments, rent payments, covered utilities for the loan forgiveness during that covered period. Next slide, please. You want to check with your lender to see when they're going to start accepting forgiveness applications if you've used all of your funds. The lenders are still awaiting additional information from SBA on, processing the forgiveness applications. So don't be concerned if you approach your lender and they tell you we're not accepting forgiveness applications yet, because they have a certain amount of time in which they have to process those applications, and send them up to SBA. If you've reduced the salaries or wages of employees by more than 25%, then you must apply that reduction for the entire duration of the loan period, either the 8 weeks or the 24 weeks, and not as of the date that you apply for forgiveness. Next slide, please. Including the payroll costs paid or incurred during the covered period are eligible for forgiveness. So when you're looking at what's going to be covered, whatever that expense is must have occurred during the covered period. There are caps on the amounts that you're eligible for if you are a self-employed individual, and it's the lesser of, if you use the 8-week period, $15,385, and the 24-week period, $20,833. That's the maximum for the owner, employee, or self-employed individual that you would be allowed to take and eligible for forgiveness. Next slide, please. A non-payroll cost is eligible for forgiveness if it was paid during the covered period or if it was incurred during the covered period. So say, for instance, you get your utility bill in August, okay, and it's after your covered period, but yet that expense occurred during your covered period, which would be July, then that would be an eligible expense for forgiveness. However, you cannot prepay expenses that would not be covered as a forgivable item. Next slide, please. The lender is going to have 60 days to complete their review and submit it to SBA. And then SBA has 90 days to complete our review and then notify the lender of any amount that's not forgiven. So going back to that, any amount that's not forgiven, if your loan was made prior to June 5th, then you'll be required to repay it within 2 years. And if it was June 5th or after, then it's 5 years. And the lender is going to notify you of what amount was not forgiven and when the first payment is due. You are required to keep all of your records for the PPP funds for 6 years. Next slide, please. We have 2 forgiveness applications, the 3508EZ or short form, and the 3508 or long form. You would be able to use this 3508 short EZ rather, the short form, if you're able to check either of those boxes. And basically there's been no reduction in employees and no reduction in their salaries. If you're able to check one of those boxes, then you can use the 3508 EZ. However, if there was a reduction in employees or a reduction in their salaries, you cannot use this form. You'll have to use the long form. Next slide, please. In requesting your forgiveness application, of course, the legal business name of the company and your tax ID number and your address, phone number, and email for the primary point of contact. The PPP loan number and the lender PPP loan number. So if you don't have either of those, the one from SBA and the one from the lender, you'll need to get that from the lender. The amount of your loan, that amount that was dispersed, the number of employees at the time that you submitted your application, and the number of employees at the time that you're submitting your forgiveness application. We'll also need to know the disbursement date, the date that the money was actually put into your account has to be on that application. If you received an idle advance, you need to include that, because remember, that's going to be deducted from the forgiveness amount, your idle application number, and your payroll schedule. Next slide, please. The same information is required for the 3508 long form. Next slide, please. You'll also need to include, that long form includes the PPP loan forgiveness calculation form, the PPP Schedule A, that's the worksheet, and the demographic information. That information is optional, the worksheet and the demographic information. However, with your application, you must submit the loan forgiveness calculation form and the PPP Schedule A. Next slide, please. For the employees, you're going to need to be able to include that employee's name and their identifier, which is the last 4 digits of their social, the cash compensation, the average number of full-time equivalent employees that you have, their salary and hourly wage if there was a reduction, and we've talked about the exceptions that are allowed to you where you made the good faith efforts and employees didn't come back to work and you notify the state unemployment office, and you're able to document those good faith efforts to us. Those are the exceptions. Next slide, please. Just a reminder of the forgiveness application certifications, which are pretty much the same that you have to make at the time that you submit your application for the PPP. You will need to initial each of these certifications as a part of your loan forgiveness application. Next slide, please. And an authorized individual has to sign the loan forgiveness application. Next slide, please. We're still encouraging everyone to beware of scams. As I mentioned, there's no fee for you to apply for a PPP or an EIDL. No one can push an application through for you in exchange for a fee. The applications are processed in the order of receipt. Next slide, please. There are individuals out there who will use SBA's logo, and you might think it's a legitimate email. I encourage you that if you get an email and it's suspicious, feel free to email us, so that we can confirm whether or not it is from a legitimate source with the Small Business Administration. With respect to the EIDLs, your emails are going to come from disaster customer service at sba.gov. Regarding the PPP, you'll be dealing with the lender who is processing your application. Next slide, please. We encourage you to sign up for updates from SBA. Sign up for our newsletter. Next slide, please. All that we ask of you is your email address and your zip code. That's all we ask, so that you can stay up to date on changes within the SBA programs and services. Next slide, please. And this is my contact information. I encourage you to reach out to me if you have any questions or need additional information. Generally, email is the best way to reach me, or you can call me on my cell or send me a text. So Kenyatta, that concludes my presentation. Do we have any questions?
Yes, ma'am, we do.
Okay.
What I'm gonna do, because there was a few individuals that did ask in the chat. I'm gonna go there first. Any questions that you have now, please put it in the question and answer. That way I can flow a lot better while we go through them, instead of going back and forth. So I'm gonna start in the chat first, Ms. Joe, and then we'll move over to the question and answer part where there's a few. There's probably a number of other questions as well.
Okay.
Someone asks, can someone charge a fee to complete the application process and thereby get a percentage of the loan amount?
No.
Real simple.
Yeah. No, there is no fee for completing this loan, and you should not be agreeing to pay anyone a percentage of the amount for which you are approved. Okay. Now, if you engage and if you have a relationship with an accountant and they're charging you a fee for completing that application, that's between you and that accountant. That's not something that's covered by SBA.
All right. Does loss of an Airbnb rents qualify for the EIDL?
It could, and it may. You'll need to be able to include, there is a line on the EIDL where you're able to show what your lost rents were.
I apologize. Go ahead, Ms. Joe.
Just make sure you include that information on your application. That's one of the questions on the EIDL.
Now, so someone asked, please review again the forgiveness application deadlines for the PPP based on disbursement date. are you
Okay.
able to apply for more than one business? So answer that part first, and then I'll come to the second part of the question, Ms. Joe.
Okay, so regarding the covered period, your covered period is either 8 weeks from the date of disbursement or 24 weeks from your date of disbursement. So your deadline, if you choose to use the 8 weeks, is going to be within 10 months from that 8-week period following disbursement. If you choose to use the 24-week covered period, then it's 10 months from the end of that 24-week covered period.
Okay. Second part of the question was, are you able to apply for more than one business if you have multiple businesses?
If if you have multiple businesses, they would each need to have their own separate employer identification number. So if you're speaking of a PPP, generally there's not going to be a problem with these separate EINs. Where we're running into a problem is with the idols, okay? Because you may have a home-based business, or you may have multiple businesses operating from that home location, or multiple businesses operating from a commercial space, okay? And even though they may each have a separate employee identification number, if they are operating from the same location, then they're going to show up as a duplicate, because you're not paying double rents and you're not paying double utility expenses for that same location. So those will come up as a duplicate. So it just depends on if you're applying for an idle or a PPP. If it's an idle and it's multiple businesses operating from the same location, chances are they're going to come up as a duplicate.
Okay. I was given a $1,000, and this is how they referenced it. REF-EIDG deposit into my business checking account. Does this mean I was denied for the grant?
That was the grant, okay? That was actually the idle advance. So that $1,000 was based upon your number of employees. So if you put that you had 0 employees, you were counted as an employee and you received $1,000, because the idle advance was based upon the number of employees, because the purpose of the idle advance was to help you meet payroll costs.
Okay. And then this is the last one out of the chat, and then we'll go through all the questions in the question and answer section. So
Okay.
can you repeat the information about Schedule C, line 31?
Okay, line 31 on Schedule C is where a self-employed individual or independent contractor or sole proprietor would indicate their net profit from the business. So the amount of your PPP would be calculated based upon your net profit. If you're showing 0 or less, meaning you show 0 or a loss, then you're saying to us that you did not have a net profit, and you didn't, and thereby you would not be eligible for a PPP.
Okay. So this goes back to the question that was originally when asked about the going into the checking account. I was given PPP May 28th. Do I automatically need to use the funds within 8 weeks? Am I?
Okay, you have the option. If you were approved prior to June 5th, you have the option of either using 8 weeks or 24 weeks. That became effective June 5th. So even if your loan was approved and dispersed prior to June 5th, you have the option of spreading it out and to the 8-week period. I mean, to the 24-week period. I apologize.
Okay. So we're gonna go. Now this first one is a little long. So it says
Oh,
I applied for the EIDL on April 10th. My credit was pulled and the application was approved. I received the loan portal June 11th, and since this time, no other assistance has been provided. I have provided my SBA Form 3502, Form 4605T, and my most recent taxes that were filed in 2019. I did not receive the grant and applied on April 10th. I have provided all up-to-date information to validate banking information. And so their question with that being said is, because they still haven't had any assistance, what more do they have to do, or what more can they do?
okay, there is nothing else that they need to do. What they can do right now, if they will send me an email or a text with the confirmation number for their application, we'll see if we can get someone to check the status of the application. As I mentioned, we received more than 10 million applications, and we're doing, the best that we can in processing them and trying to get them closed, funded and closed as quickly as possible. So for right now, what we can do is offer to get someone to check the status. But I will need the confirmation number that they received. It should be a number that begins with a 3. Send that to me and I'll ask someone to check.
Okay. Is it possible to get a copy of the application after it has been submitted?
Not as far as I know, unless you did screenshots. I'm taking it, they're speaking of the EIDL. Unless you did screenshots, that's not something to which we have access.
All right. And you may have just answered this question prior to the one you just provided an answer for. So how do you check on status of EIDL advance?
Okay, if they have not received the advance, we have no more funds available for the advance. Okay, we were given $20 billion, it's all gone. So if they have not received the EIDL advance or had not received it as of July 11th, they are not going to get one.
All right. If you received a PPP loan and kept your employees hired for the 8 weeks, you used the funds in and used 100% of the funds, but found out 2 months later that you cannot keep your employees on staff and will lay them off, can you still apply for forgiveness?
Yes, as long as you use the funds for the prescribed purposes, at least 60% for payroll and no more than 40% for the eligible non-payroll expenses. So by all means, yes, you can apply for forgiveness.
Okay. Where can we go to set up repayment of EIDL, and does this loan get forgiveness?
No, the EIDL is not forgiven. And for the EIDL, you don't have to start making payments for 12 months. Now, I will, and you should have received payment information in your closing documents. If you did not, we'll need to check with the disaster servicing center once your loan goes into servicing.
Okay. Let me get here. We were able to get PPP. I'm thinking about applying for the EIDL as well. We used up the PPP in full already, 100% used for payroll. If we apply for the EIDL in a couple of weeks, would this keep me from having any of my PPP forgiven?
No, it will not. The only thing that will keep you from having any of your PPP forgiven is if you use it for purposes other than the purpose for which it was intended. So no, applying for an idle after you use your PPP funds will not affect your forgiveness.
The other question, let's see, do you happen to know if or when SBA stopped processing idle advance payments?
July 11th.
I can answer this question. Yes, there will be a copy of the presentation sent out to all attendees. You'll get a PDF copy of the slides as well as access to the recording. Obviously, once we finish making any editing, I'll be sending that out. But you also will have access from our website. So I've already posted in the chat. For those who are not able to get to the chat, it's www.louisiana, and Louisiana is spelled out. So that's www.louisianadbe.com. We're going to have it on there in our area for all our webinar recordings. So it will be accessible there as well. So the next question is, can a owner give themselves a raise/bonus during the covered period if their 2019 gross income was in excess of 100,000? LLC, not a sole proprietorship.
That conflicts with the intent of the CARES Act, and I believe that's covered in interim final rule number 3. If not, I'll have to get the exact interim final rule. And it was not intended for the, according to the statute, according to the CARES Act, the purpose of the PPP was not intended to provide a windfall for owners. So that's not something that's permitted by the CARES Act, and it's covered in one of the interim final rules.
Okay. I was given PPP May 28th. Do I automatically need to use the funds within the 8 weeks?
No, because of the Paycheck Protection Program Flexibility Act, okay, you have up to 24 weeks to use the funds.
Okay. I was approved for idle, accepted a lesser amount. Can I get the difference of the approval amount if needed?
No, because your loan has already been closed. If it's been closed and dispersed, and you requested a decrease, no, there's no way right now to get an increase.
If you have been denied and asked to resubmit for reconsideration, can you submit the reasons for reconsideration? And if so, how?
Okay, so to request reconsideration, you would send a written request to the Processing and Disbursement Center. Now, in your letter of denial, it also, in addition to providing the physical address of where you could submit the reconsideration request, it also provided an email where you could send it. So and a fax number. So you have 3 options. So look at your denial letter to see which option you want to use, either mailing it in to the Processing and Disbursement Center in Fort Worth, or emailing it, or faxing it. It's up to you.
Okay. If a borrower deferred a loan prior to PPP loan funds being distributed, could the borrower pay the interest on the loan that had accrued during the covered period to avoid the lump sum that would be due at the end of the loan as a result of the deferral?
No, because you have to keep in mind what the eligible uses of proceeds are for the PPP. Okay, and that's to make mortgage interest payments on debt that's related to, or mortgages that's related to the business, utilities, and rents. So if you use it for any purposes other than that, those amounts are not going to be forgiven.
Okay. Is the loan disbursement date the date where the funds are deposited into your account, or the loan disbursement date shown on your promissory note?
Okay, so the loan disbursement date is the date, if you're talking about PPP, the loan disbursement date is the date that the funds are deposited into your account.
Can I request a loan increase for idle? If so, how and to who?
Okay, you can request a loan increase by submitting a reconsideration request to the Processing and Disbursement Center. And in requesting that increase, you would need to submit the 13, I think it's the 1368 and the Form 2202 and your 2018 and 2019 tax returns if you've completed the 2019 and you want to include your you want to include your financial statements as of December 31st, 2019. So that's the information you'll need to submit in requesting an increase. And we don't know, we haven't received any word that they're granting any increases on the loans. However, we do know that they are looking at reconsideration requests now.
Okay. If you were in the queue prior to July 11th, will you or will you not get funds for grant if you already were in the queue?
You will not. If you had not received that advance by July 11th, you will not be getting an advance.
Someone has stated that they heard rumors that there would be a second round of PPP this year / in the future. Is there any truth to this?
This is the second round. We got $100 billion left in the PPP program. Right now, all of the loans have to be approved by August 8th. We have not received any word that any additional money is going to be placed in the PPP program. And keep in mind, one of the certifications that you had to make as a part of this application is that you're not going to submit another PPP application because there was only one application per business. So we haven't received any indication that there's going to be a second round of PPP funding or that there's going to be an opportunity for someone who's already received the PPP to receive another one.
Okay. This is, I don't know if it's a statement or a question that or just a statement that they might want you to address.
Okay.
So the idle 1,000 advance was not a grant, but it has to be paid back when you pay the loan if you signed up for it.
Okay, so the idle advance is an advance that's going to be forgiven. However, if you are approved for a PPP, then that idle advance is going to be deducted from the amount of forgiveness, and you will have to pay that. So if you don't get a PPP, then you don't have to repay the idle advance.
So the idle is strictly used for working capital, correct?
Correct. You can't use it for expenses, nor can you use it to pay off any other loans other than the current portion of what may be due, and you cannot use it to incur any additional debt.
All right. give me 1 second, because there's the individual that's responding back to one of the questions you've already answered. And I think
Okay.
it was pertaining to the one, if a borrower deferred the loan prior to PPP loan funds being distributed, could the borrower pay the interest on the loan that had accrued during the covered period to avoid the lump sum that would be due at the end of the loan as a result of the deferral? And they came back, Ms. Jordan said, it's a business related loan that was deferred. Does that change the answer that you've already provided?
It depends on what that loan was. Okay. Keep in mind in the guidance in the CARES Act and the interim final rule specifically relates to mortgage interest payments. So it depends upon what type of loan that was.
Okay. Idle is for only 6 months worth of working capital, but only for the first 6 months of 2020. That's the question that they have.
No. When you're looking at 6 months of working capital, you're looking at going forward, okay? Helping you meet your working capital needs going forward, not going back.
Okay. Can I use 100% of my PPP to pay myself as a sole proprietor?
No. That results in a windfall to the sole proprietor. And that is specifically addressed in the interim final rule number 3. It specifically states that you as a sole proprietor, independent contractor, cannot use 100% of the PPP to pay your salary because it results in a windfall to you. And the amount of your PPP was based upon your net profit and whatever percentage was included for the allowable expenses. So no, you cannot. And you can review that in interim final rule number 3.
So if you applied, and this goes back to an answer that you had given, and I think they're just following up. So if you applied and were approved for idle before 7/11, they're saying that they applied in 7/1/20, but still haven't gotten the advance. Is the advance still off the table for lack of funds, or did the fund run out on 7/11 despite approval?
If they had been approved for that advance prior to July 11th, okay, then that advance would have been deposited, okay, and it would be in their account already, okay. So if it was not deposited, there's no more money. All of the money has been expended.
For the advance?
Correct.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Do I get the forgiveness app from the lender or SBA? And the second part of that question is, can I apply for additional PPP money?
The forgiveness application is posted on the Treasury's website, treasury.gov. That's where you'll get it. And when you go to the treasury.gov website, there's a red banner there that specifically links you to the CARES Act. So you will click that link and it'll bring you to the forgiveness application. So you will not get it from SBA or the lender. You're going to access it from the treasury.gov website. And what was the second part of that question?
And can I apply for additional PPP money?
No. Once the loan is dispersed and reported to SBA, the lender has to report it to SBA on what we call the 1502 report. So once that lender reports that loan to SBA on their report, you cannot get an increase in that loan.
Okay. Let me see. This might just be. So this is in response to an answer that you have received. I received the PPP before the $1,000 idle grant. Does this now mean that I need to repay the 1,000 deducted from the PPP?
Okay, if you received your PPP prior to receiving the idle advance, then you will deduct that $1,000 from your request for forgiveness. That's one of the questions that's on the forgiveness application. Now, if you receive the idle advance prior to applying for the PPP, then you should have reported that idle advance on your PPP application. So if the idle advance came before you submitted your PPP application, it would have been deducted beforehand. If it came after you received your PPP, then you will deduct it on your PPP forgiveness application, because that will result in a duplication of benefits if we forgave it twice.
Okay. How to determine 60-day window for idle? Which date is considered day one? Is it the initial date of notification via email?
Okay, it's the initial date in your portal when SBA sends that link to you to go in, that email to you to go in and accept the amount. That's the date that 60-day window starts, is the date that we send that notice to you to go in and accept or decline the idle amount that's been approved for you. That's when that date starts.
If my business started February 1st, 2020, can I apply for PPP even though I do not have tax returns for 19? What information is needed if not?
Okay, so if you started February 1st, 2020, yes, you can apply for a PPP. What you'll notice in the guidance is that you'll be asked to provide information to support that you will be filing a tax return for 2020.
If I submitted for reconsideration and haven't heard anything on my day 60 of idle, what should I do?
Okay, so have you been denied for the idle? Is that why you're requesting reconsideration? Or did you submit a reconsideration request for an increase in your idle? Okay, if you are requesting reconsideration because you were denied, remember you have up to 6 months to request reconsideration if you were denied. If you are requesting reconsideration for an increase in your idle, if you do not accept what's been offered within that 60-day window, then the application is going to be considered withdrawn.
If you were approved for PPP based on 2019 salaries, but now in 2020, the employee's making more money, higher salary, what happens? And the example that they have is, employee made $4,000 a month in 2019, but in January 2020, they made $5,000 a month.
Okay, so as long as they're not exceeding that statutory limitation of what is allowed per employee, then that's fine if they're making more. They just need to be able to provide the records to support their payroll records, to support whatever it is that went to payroll. That's going to be fine, because keep in mind that for some of the employers, they provided what they called hazard pay for their employees. And this was something that came out in one of the subsequent interim final rules that would be permitted. So it's okay if they're making more money.
Okay. How
As
do I
long
use?
wait, I'm sorry, Kenyatta. As long as it does not cause them to exceed that $100,000 threshold.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
How do I use my PPP as a sole proprietor? Do I use 60%?
Okay, so as a sole proprietor, at least 60% has to go toward um, payroll, and no more than 40% can go toward paying those eligible expenses.
All right. So I have until August 8th to have my reconsideration submitted in, correct?
I don't know what they're talking about. Reconsideration for what?
I'm
Is,
assuming, go
is it
ahead.
reconsideration for a denial?
And see, that's all, this is the course, this is what they have. So I have until August 8th to have my reconsideration submitted in and correct. And then they say also my employees are contracted. Could I consider that as a part of my payroll? So maybe they're talking about the PPP. Yeah,
Okay,
and
so
they did come back and say, I apologize. They just responded, Ms. Joe, and said, yes, that's due to a denial.
okay, so for a denial, if it's idle, okay, are they talking about idle? If they're talking about idle, they have 6 months from the date of the denial to request reconsideration. So if they were declined for an idle, then they just need to count 6. I don't know where the August 8th comes in. Oh, August 8th is the date that is the cutoff for getting approved for a PPP.
Mm-hmm.
So they may be mixing up a couple of things. If they're applying for a PPP, that PPP has to be approved by August 8th. If it's an idle and they were denied for an idle, they have 6 months from the date of denial to apply for reconsideration.
Okay. And this is a follow-up question to the 2019 salary versus the 2020. So the PPP you received, the company gets credited for paying the 5,000, not the 4,000, and 1,000 not get credited.
Oh no, they would include, if that's a part of the payroll cost, then yeah, that would be considered a part of the payroll cost. We're not penalizing them if they're paying their employees more, as long as it doesn't exceed that $100,000 statutory limitation.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
I got one last question. This was a follow-up to the one once again about the accrued interest.
Okay.
You had mentioned saying it depend on the loan, and they just responded saying building. So I'm assuming the building loan.
Oh, okay. So if it's mortgage interest payments on the building where the business is located, then yes, they can use that they can use the PPP to make those payments, but they can't use it for any prepayments.
Okay, so yeah, I'm assuming this is because this was the question they had asked. If a borrower deferred a loan prior to PPP loan funds being distributed, so now they're saying, I'm assuming this is a building loan. Could the borrower pay the interest on the loan that had accrued during the covered period to avoid the lump sum that would be due at the end of the loan as a result of the deferral?
Yes.
Okay. Looks like we have one more, and then I'm gonna check the chat, and then obviously we're gonna respect your time, Ms. Joe, because I know you be doing multiple webinars. I'm gonna check and see if in the chat, but we got one more in the question that has popped up. My life saving was spent to create and build the backbone of my business. Inventory, tech, etc. I opened my skincare studio as a single owner, sole practitioner 3 weeks prior to quarantine, before quarantine. Being part of phase 2, I was forced to live on my remaining savings. My skill requires face-to-face interaction, making this time seriously tough. Does the SBA have any plans to address the hit that the skilled service providers are enduring?
There is, other than what would be available under our normal loan programs, there's nothing else that's available. Now for EIDL, the business had to have been in operation as of January 31st, 2020, if they wanted to apply for EIDL. Okay, because we have to go with the date that the pandemic was declared. So for EIDL, we're using January 31st, 2020. For PPP, okay, you must have been in operation as of February 15th, 2020. So those are the dates that apply to those programs and levels of assistance that's available for impacts from COVID-19. Beyond that, the other assistance available from SBA would come through our guaranteed loan programs through the lenders. So you'd have to work with your lender to see if they're willing to provide any financial assistance with SBA's guarantee.
Well, I just checked the chat box. I didn't see any new questions there. We have addressed all of the questions in the question and answer section. So, you know, just as I began, I want to conclude by saying, man, we definitely appreciate you all taking the time out of your schedules to get some very informative information from Ms. Joe. Obviously, if there's any additional questions that you have afterwards, you can feel free to email me directly, and then I'll be sure to get those to Ms. Joanne. But you can also direct them to her if you choose, because she has made her contact information available. I put all of my information in the chat. I will say it live also. My email address is Kenyatta, KENYATTA .Sparks, SPARKS at S as in Sam, J as in Jack, B as in boy, group.com. My direct line is 225-706-5756. And once again, our website for our supportive services is www.louisianadbe.com. And Louisiana is spelled out. I kept the screen up for Ms. Joe's information in case you all wanted to get that again. Ms. Joe, do you have any closing words?
Just to say thank you once again, Kenyatta. Thank you to everyone who participated in today's webinar. And if you have questions or need additional assistance, just feel free to reach out to us at SBA. So on the screen, in addition to seeing my direct contact information, the number for our main number, the 504-589-6685, is also listed. And for any reason, if you have trouble getting in touch with me, you can always call the 504-589-6685 number, and we have someone monitoring that number throughout the day. So please, 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 if you need SBA's assistance, please do not hesitate to reach out to us.
And once
And that's all.
Go ahead, I apologize. Go ahead, Ms. Joe.
No, I said, and that's all I have. Just thank you so much, Kenyatta.
Well, thank you, Ms. Joe. Obviously, like I've mentioned a few times already, I know that you are stretched very thin with doing a lot of these webinars. So we truly appreciate you taking the time to do this and making yourself available even afterwards. So I definitely don't want to be remiss of and not mention that again. And to all attendees, again, thank you. And this concludes our webinar.
Okay, thanks, Kenyatta.
You're welcome.
Okay, bye-bye.